My name is Emmy Mizuno, and I'm here with my family today because I stand in solidarity with the women who were used as sexual slaves during World War II. And I'd like to read a poem that I wrote because my grandfather was in the Japanese military, and he was captured in Burma. And I wonder about the things that he saw when he was in Asia, when he served. And so this is for my grandfather, but also for all of us in the succeeding generations. So, for my grandfather, did you know terror, grandfather? Did you witness it? Did you feel it? Did you make others feel it? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you silence? You kept your silences, but your children and grandchildren will not. The women are my grandmothers. I hold them and cherish them. They do not die with you. They live to voice their terror. So that's the poem that I wrote for my grandmother and grandfather. And for the generation of women who survived the horrendous treatment by the Japanese military, there should be justice for them and recognition of their place in history as survivors of systematic terror. Thank you.
My name is Takashi, and as my daughter Amy read her poem about my father was in the Japanese military, Japanese army as a pharmacist since late 1930s to 1945, and he was sent to China, and then after that he was sent to Myanmar, Burma, and he was captured by the British, and he could return to Japan in the following year. And I'm a son of the former Japanese military, and I feel that it's my responsibility to make right relationship with Koreans and Filipinos, Chinese and Malaysians and other Asian people and the Pacific Islanders, and including Europeans, including British and Americans. And just I wrote this one. Recovering dignity for the people with Japanese ancestry is an official apology and compensation and education, not to deny the history. And this is the way we can reconcile with the people in Asia and the Pacific Islands and in the United States and Europe. And the people of Nadeshiko Action Group has been doing is just opposite ways to deal with the past atrocities of the Japanese people. And so that's why I'm here to tell them. And one of them already kept telling me, it's lie, lie, lie. And the Koreans are telling lie, lie, lie. They are demanding only for money. And I told her my father was in the Japanese military, and I know the true history. And I told her what she's saying is a lie. And it's sad to talk about this kind of thing with such an old lady. She says she's 86 years old. Yeah. But I believe this is a way how the people with Japanese ancestry, especially in the United States, to recover our dignity. Because those people of Nadeshiko Action Groups, they emphasize dignity too. But the way how to achieve dignity is very different from my belief. Thank you.
Thank you. Well with you.
Thank you. And also one of the sponsors of this event is Michael Wong. He's with Veterans for Peace, and they have been struggling against militarization in Iraq and around the world, and they certainly are against militarization in Asia, which would harm millions of people. So welcome, Michael Wong.
Hi, my name is Michael Wong. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace San Francisco. I think everybody here has already articulated what's going on in terms of this group coming from Japan, trying to revise the history of World War II, deny the war crimes, deny the use of comfort women as sexual slaves. They're trying to change the Constitution of Japan to eliminate Article 9, change the peace constitution, and they're trying to remilitarize Japan. And this is, of course, for disaster. During World War II, the countries of all of Asia were devastated. Japan was devastated. China, Korea, Indochina, all these nations were devastated. Everybody suffered. And in the end, Japan lost the war. However, following the war, Japan has in effect won the peace. Japan economically rose up and became a first world country. They have nothing to gain by war. They have everything to lose. If you look at what the United States has done when we have gone to war, in Vietnam, we devastated the country. We dropped more bombs on Vietnam than we had dropped in all of World War II. Between 2 and 5 million Vietnamese died. American soldiers came home. We lost not quite 60,000 killed in action in Vietnam. More than double that number committed suicide after they returned from the war. Agent Orange has continued to plague both Vietnam veterans and Vietnamese. And then we went to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Libya, numerous small wars around the world, Philippines. And what was the result of all that? The result of all that was devastation in the countries that we attacked. If you look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, these countries are in chaos right now. The wars are not over for these people. They are still continuing. People are still dying. People are still suffering. And what did America get out of it? We lost several thousand soldiers. The Iraq veterans came back. Just like the Vietnam veterans against the war, the Iraq veterans formed an organization called Iraq Veterans Against the War. They've been tracking what's been happening. The Iraq veterans have been having an average of 22 suicides a day. 2 people that I know personally have died by suicide within the last 6 months. The war came home. It brought nothing but suffering to the American people. If Japan chooses to go back on the warpath, it will suffer the same fate that America suffered. It will suffer the same fate that it suffered in World War II. Japan would be foolish to throw everything away for a misguided sense of pride. Also, the people here that are in this community center advocating the revisionist history do not represent the majority in Japan. This September, Veterans for Peace and Iraq Veterans Against the War met with a photojournalist from Japan, Mr. Guru Nakamura, and he came with a delegation of 15 peace activists and other people, most of them older retired people. One of the things they said when I asked him what's happening with the attempt to revise the Japanese Constitution and eliminate Article 9, he said the majority of the people in Japan oppose revising the Constitution. They oppose racism and they oppose any revisionist history that is false. What's happened, though, is some powerful people are for it. The government, the Abe government, is very closely associated with these people in this attempt to change history and this attempt to change the Constitution. Just like in America, there are right-wingers and powerful people working for their own interests and trying to drive the nation towards war and putting aside the best interests of their nation than the majority of the people. This is something that everybody should reject.
My name is Jana McBurney Lynn, and first of all, I want to say I love Japan, and in fact spent 6 years living in Tokyo and Kobe. Currently, I'm president of the South Bay chapter of U.S.-China People's Friendship Association. I'm also married to a man from southern China and have been for over 25 years. I'm an author and a historian. I co-authored recently the story Blossoms and Bayonets, which is the story based on a true life account of Dr. Hee-dong Chai, who grew up in Seoul, Korea during World War II under Japanese occupation. So I not only have heard from my Chinese in-laws and my Korean colleague about Japanese aggression during World War II, but I spent years studying the subject. In Korea, Japan enticed many a young woman into coming out to work for the sock factories for higher wages than they could ever expect to get anywhere else. These factories were far away, except they didn't exist. There were no factories, there were no wages, there was only rape. In other countries which included China, the Philippines, Thailand, Burma, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Taiwan, they just enslaved the young women. That anyone would suggest that this did not occur is tantamount to raping these 200,000 plus Asian and European women yet again. As I said, I love Japan, and I hope that Mrs. Yamamoto and the Abe government will stop tarnishing the country's reputation by rewriting a history the rest of the world either experienced or knows about. All victims and their families and people like me ask for, which seems paltry in comparison to the comfort women's suffering, is acknowledgement and an apology. Do the right thing, stop spreading lies, and apologize. Thank you.
Charles is going to speak. He's a retired laborer in San Francisco. Welcome, Charles.
This has this personal connotation, this thing, because my wife is Korean, and she lived in Korea under the occupation. Although she was young, certainly from her family's experiences, she has no fond memories of the time. I can assure you that. And, in fact, she holds quite a bit of resentment, which I'm sure a lot of Korean people do for the treatment they had to undergo. I don't have any resentment against the Japanese people, but I certainly know why they're going in the direction they are going with this type of thing here today. The U.S. policy is to encircle China. China, as they see it, of course, now is the #1 economy in the world, and that means it's an enemy of the United States. And of course, 60 to 70% of the country is under the control of the Communist Party, state controlled. So that's a danger to the capitalist system. They would love to get in there and get control of that economy because, again, it's the largest economy in the world. And so they encircle it. That's the reason for the machinations in Xinjiang, in Tibet. And now they want to see Japan militarized to the max, recognizing their strength, to further encircle and threaten China. And of course, then ferment counter-revolution in China. That's the prize. It's always been the prize of the East, the West. The Western imperialists have been trying to surround China for 250 years. It's all called the Great Game. Quite a bit of history on it. And this is only a modern-day move in that direction. So we have to be aware of that. The United States military and political policies are to encircle China, and Japan is a key link in that encirclement.
This rally and press conference is against racism, and it's against nationalism and whipping up people against each other. And we know that in the United States because the United States is using the term terrorism to whip up people here against people all over the world. So we are saying that the enemy is not the Japanese people, the enemy is not the Chinese people, the enemy is not the American people, but the enemy are governments now, which are actually exacerbating militarization, exacerbating nationalism, and changing the textbooks in Japan to eliminate the situation of the comfort women, to eliminate what happened in the Second World War as part of the process of remilitarizing Japan. And that's why they're trying to get rid of Clause 9, which prevents offensive war by the Japanese military. Now, who will benefit by militarization? Well, it'll be Mitsubishi, it'll be companies like in the United States that make money by selling military equipment. That's who benefits by war, but that's not to the benefit of people in Japan or people in the United States. And what we're saying here is this protest and the press conference, again, is to educate people in the United States that the attempt to revise the history of Japan in the Second World War is not true, number one, and actually is a threat to people to understand the history. I mean, I have been told that the women who were used as sex slaves, they suffered, and they're still suffering, those that are still alive. So why say that it didn't happen? Why tell people that it didn't happen? What is the purpose of telling people it didn't happen? Yumiko says that, Yamamoto says that she wants to protect the pride of the people of Japan. Yeah. And we say the people of Japan have a lot to be proud about. They have a great history, they have a great tradition, they have tremendous cultural and social attributes. But one of the things that I think the majority of Japanese people are not happy about is militarization and the war. Most Japanese do not want another war, as do most people in Asia. They don't want to have another war because they know what happened to their families. Millions of people were killed. So we're saying we need to prevent another war in Asia, we need to prevent militarization, and we need to tell the truth about the history. If people don't know their history, like in the United States, this is a good example. There's a poster here from Ferguson to Japan. There's a rise of racism in the United States. And as we protest today, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are marching all over the United States because of the brutal murder of African Americans, of young people, of blacks. And what is that all about? Well, it's about racism. It's about racist stereotypes and saying that blacks are taking jobs and blacks are not human beings. It's a very dangerous racist thing. So what we say is, no, it's not just in Japan. It's right here in the United States that we have to fight racism. It's an international struggle against racism and that ideology because it leads to murder. In Japan, people have been murdered. Leftists, mayors have been murdered by nationalists. The newspaper Asahi Shimbun has been threatened because it had some articles about the history, and they're trying to intimidate people so they don't tell the truth. And that's why even the New York Times, which is a very conservative newspaper, not according to Fox News, but to many people, it's a conservative newspaper, has opposed the secrecy law, has opposed the revision of history in Japan, even the New York Times. Why would the New York Times say, don't revise the history? People have to ask that. I mean, that's an important question. And the reason is, this revision of history means that people are being told it's okay about what we did, that it's okay. And I would also say that the United States record in Korea, for example, where we massacred people, that's part of the history as well. People need to know that history. That's been covered up. Congressman Pete McCloskey went to Korea to investigate that as far as the massacre of Koreans. So we, as a coalition here, are saying this is not just about Japan, it's about us in the United States as well. It's all of us.
Steve and I were both at 518 Valencia last week in the mission for the program on the pivot to the Pacific. And the speakers came from the Philippines, South Korea, and Okinawa. And all of them had evidence, history maps, and of the expanded military bases and militarization. So in other words, what the U.S. had before in their client states is rapidly being ramped up and increased. So when the young students at Santa Cruz talk about the system, Japan and Germany were late to the great game, and because the U.S. Roosevelt stepped in with Churchill to save the money in the Bank of England, well, the U.S. became the new great game. So if anybody hears about the Bretton Woods system, that's in New Hampshire. They all sat around one of these, luxury resorts in the woods in New Hampshire, and they came up with the World Bank and the IMF. And if people have heard of the Federal Reserve, that was after World War I. Why were American boys sent to Europe in World War I? The money in militarized global war is tremendous. Okay, so where's the money? In the military, the oil, the industries. So you come back to the Pacific Theater in World War II. Who lost China? So that was the question that Time magazine, they had Life and Look magazines. So Henry Luce pretty much controlled the American image of China, which became Madame Chiang Kai-shek, because she spoke English and she was a Christian and she went to college, you know, in Boston. So the point is, as our labor brother said, right, where's the money? Another really helpful source of finding out who made money in China, pay attention to HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. They started their empire in Shanghai and Hong Kong, and they're all over the world. And they're a bunch of rich Brits, rich spoiled Brits. The other book I'd like to recommend to understand how what happened after World War II, because Madame Chiang Kai-shek did not become First Lady, right? When Mao's Eighth Route Army won that civil war, despite U.S. and Western intervention, there's another common myth to reteach the history that somehow North Korea, with the aid of the Chinese communists, invaded South Korea. No, that's another false flag. I.F. Stone wrote The Hidden History of the Korean War. So there's a lot of ways that the guys who are making the money, they set these things up, and they set that one up too. So if anybody else can't find it, I have a copy that somebody gave me of The Hidden History of the Korean War. Last but not least, we should know as Americans that when they expanded NATO, Japan and South Korea are NATO with Australia and New Zealand. They call them contact countries, but U.S. arms sales, 70% go to the NATO countries. So of course they want to expand, more sales. So last but not least, I have seen raging grannies, where's Ruth, at Lockheed. So Lockheed Martin has the manufacturing plant at Sunnyvale, Matilda Avenue, and every month, the fourth Friday, there's a vigil there. I think they're there every Friday in December. But the fourth Friday of the month, in front of there, those people have been vigiling against the profits and the evil done by Lockheed. Oh, and the research and design is done very near Stanford at, it's on Hanover Street off Page Mill, okay, near where the Wall Street Journal used to be. They have an advanced technology center. So these places are very close to us. And last but not least, on the Stanford campus, Hoover Institute, and next door is Encina Hall, and that's where the biggest academics, and I have to give this guy credit by name, Larry Diamond, is our local NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I'd like to give credit to the Japanese woman teacher who has done the most to educate Japanese people about the true history. She was interviewed on Chinese TV today. Her name is Tamaki Matsuoka, and she has interviewed victims and survivors in China, and she's about 67 now, and she's continuing to do a lot of this good work.
Comments, I want to say one thing. The 1% in the U.S. is not only 1% in U.S., 1% all over the world. In Taiwan, they have 1%. In Korea, they have 1%. In Japan, they have 1%.
Yeah.
So the 1% unified together against 99% around the whole world. So the whole world, the world is fight for the 1% in each country, each nation.
We have to fight against that
Citizens
system.
must unify together. But all the citizen has been used by the mainstream news narrative against themselves.
So one point I want to make is that there are many good people in each country.
Right.
including, of course, Japan, and there's no surprise there. My professor was very honest professor, and
Akira Kurosawa, the
yeah.
very
So
famous
so
Japanese
yeah. So what he was saying is that it was very unfortunate in World War II. There, you know, of course, Japanese people were misled and went into the war, and so he felt that you know, Japanese people owed a great deal to Chinese people, right? Oops. So there are a lot of Japanese people, even to this day, you know, they are doing their honest work. They're saying their honest things on that. What I found is it's amazing that somebody like maybe Mrs. Yamamoto here, she could have the, you know, kind of gather all the energy, come here and tell the world that it was a lie. To me, it's a, you know, it's a daylight, right? So we all know that. That's why I think we're here. What I see is it's important for each one of us that when we see somebody doing that, we speak up. We make it known that this is not true. And I think whether it's in the United States, whether it's Japan, whether in China, whether the rest of the world, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to tell the rest of people. Say, don't tell lie, please.
Well,
And with that, we can unite the rest of people, because at the end of it, it's what truth that will prevail.
that's right.
So I'm not too concerned. Actually, Ms. Yamamoto is going to make some speech here, because at the end of it, it's what truth matters. There are many good Japanese in Japan, in the rest of the world. They are actually telling the truth, yeah. But it's a small fraction of them making some noise there, and including in the United States. They have different agendas. I'm not very surprised to be that the Abe government that actually is uniting some of the members in Japanese society, try to reach out. The reason for that is actually it's very obvious, right? They want to change this history so that they can lead to that agenda that they're trying to reach out on that. So I was not actually surprised to hear that at all on that. But what we need, actually, each one of us, we need to speak up. We need to fight against that.
We have Japanese and Koreans have a different view about the history.
I understand that. And there's racism on both sides. I'm against nationalism and
it's
racism.
differences.
Well, nationalism and racism I'm against.
Well, it's not nationalism. I mean,
There's no
I'm not a nationalist. I must say first.
You're not a
I'm
nationalist?
I'm a patriot. I love Japan.
Well, what
I
about,
never
okay,
segregated.
why has the Asahi Shimbun editor been attacked, and why is the Abe government visiting the shrine?
No attacking. But some people say that they insist that the Asahi Shimbun has been wrong, and the Asahi Shimbun apologized about their articles.
What was wrong about their articles?
Well, it's very complicated.
Well, I
It's
mean,
not,
Prime Minister Abe has appointed people like to the NHK,
yes.
who deny
Point. I'm not sure he appoints people. No.
to NHK. Well, they bring in people at NHK, and they're bringing on people who want to.
NHK pick up the people of the committee, I think, but I'm not sure about that.
People are
I'm sorry.
appointed by the government. I mean, the government appoints people to NHK, and these people then want to say that the history of Japan in the Second World War is not true. What happened? The accusations of the Nanking massacre, the accusation.
Moscow was not what the Chinese communists say.
No, I'm not talking about
killed their-
communists. I'm not talking about communists. I'm talking about the factual
I'm
record.
sorry, I'm not a historian. I'm not talking. I'm not.
But this is part of the history.
Yeah.
And this is part of the history that people need to know. That doesn't mean the United States itself doesn't commit crimes. The United States commits crimes. The Koreans commit crimes. We're against crimes everywhere, but
I'm not a
but we know.
historian. I'm afraid I say something wrong about the history, so I'm not talking about the history
Okay,
right now.
well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about
I say
the
no to the Comfortable statue in Glendale.
Why? Why do you say
Well,
no?
Can we just stop? I'm sorry, she's gonna have to go to the meeting. So, well, are you
Well,
guys gonna be staying here?
Yeah, we're going to stay in here. I mean, we want a debate and discussion, and we're in favor of a discussion.
Here
You know,
to
to
discuss
clarify
with you.
that.
I'm
Well, why are you here
Okay.
in the
I
United
would
States?
like to do a presentation for the people, Japanese people here living in San
Well,
Francisco.
we're trying to educate American people because, you know, in the United States, there's a rise of racism in the United States. Blacks, there's racism against Asians. There's against Filipinos.
It's very sad because many diverse, variety of people live here in the United
Absolutely,
States.
it's full.
The harmony is very important.
That's right.
I agree with you.
But nationalism and racism is harmful to harmony. When you have nationalism and racism, that's very harmful to people. And what we believe is we have to have equality for all, and we have to tell the real truth of the history.
What does? Why do you know this word?
Because the Korean Japanese are discriminated against. Those are the names of the Japanese.
That you know this word.
That's right.
My father, I told you.
Do you speak Japanese? Excuse me, do you speak
Yeah,
Japanese?
she speaks Japanese.
Ah,
They're
you told-
Japanese of Korean descent. Look, I mean, Koreans
So
were
what-
Koreans were brought to Japan as slave labor. Do you disagree with that?
Slave labor.
No,
It's
they weren't
yeah,
brought to
you
Japan as slave labor.
misunderstood that part.
During
They're
the
not-
Second World War, like in the United States captured, for example, the United States captured
About the
Japanese in
Korean-
Peru and brought them here to the United States to trade to the Japanese. Do you know about that?
Well, you misunderstood about the Korean forced into Japan. It's not
Koreans
true.
came
They
voluntarily?
wanted to come to Japan and they moved. All of them. After the World War II, they went home. And some stayed in Japan.
Mitsubishi and Japanese companies needed labor. The reason they needed labor.
I don't know about the Mitsubishi labor point.
Just go for two women.
Mitsubishi and these companies needed labor, and they got labor from Korea. I mean, this is a factual part of history.
I'm sorry, I don't know about that very much.
This is
I
part of
can't
history
discuss about
because
that.
there are lawsuits about that of Koreans who were brought to Japan.
So I would like to say I never attacked Chinese Korean. I'm not racist. I'm not nationalist. I'm patriot.
Okay, well, if you're a patriot, let's tell the truth about the history.
Yes. You study history too, please. Yes. I wish you could read Japanese history in Japanese. You will be learn something different.
What does it say? That there was no discrimination?
Well, I'm not a teacher, history teacher. I can read Japanese. I can read history book in Japanese, but you can't. I know something you don't know.
Every history there is discrimination against women.
Are you saying
against
that all the
race?
women that worked in these servicing Japanese military were volunteers? They didn't come of
Not
their own?
volunteer. They are paid.
They were paid.
That was
This
their
is
They
work.
weren't coerced to come.
to write, So, we're not gonna against about your, event. Just we wanna say to the world through this opportunity what we believe, what we, what is the life
you have a
it
right to
is.
say that, and
It's,
we have
what
we
is
have-
the United States collected information for 7 years, and that, says in the United States. You collected the information, and no Japanese military done that kind of things. It's revealed recently, about 1 week ago.
What about Prime Minister Nakasone? What did he say?
Yeah, but he thought like that. But recently
But
we
he said that.
found
Okay. Prime Minister Nakasone made the comment.
Yeah, but
How can you deny his comment?
But
He
we,
made it. I didn't make it.
so that's you believe that's okay. But we believe what he said was based on the correct source.
But he was there.
Yeah, but we don't believe that.
He was a lieutenant
No,
there.
that
He was
we
an
believe.
officer.
That we believe. That gonna say to the world.
Who are you with?
My name is Yoshi, and I'm a local person who believe that what is right, what is not right here. So that's why I want to say today through this opportunity. So yeah. So thank you very much for coming today, and we have to start. Yeah, see you soon.